The movie opens with a truly terrifying scene. A pregnant woman has been tied up against her will by a group of people. She keeps begging them to spare her baby's life, but no one listens to her desperate cries. Moments later, both the mother and her newborn child are brutally murdered. All that remains are horrifying screams, and then complete silence. 3 weeks later, the story moves forward and we meet Sara, a woman who is about to give birth. She is in the final stage of her pregnancy, and her delivery could happen at any moment. Sara lives with her partner Carol, and the two are eagerly waiting for their baby to arrive. But over the next few days, strange and disturbing things begin happening to Sara. One day, she suddenly develops an overwhelming craving for raw meat. The urge becomes so intense that she completely loses control of herself. Without thinking, she starts eating all the raw meat from the refrigerator and even licks the remaining meat off the plate. Then a second later, she feels as if something is stuck in her throat. When she tries to pull it out, a large clump of hair comes out of her mouth. Shockingly, a small sharp object that looks like a tooth comes out with it. Terrified, Sara immediately flushes both things down the toilet, but that is only the beginning. As soon as she sits on the toilet, she sees a horrifying man covered in blood, with large horns on his head, slowly walking toward her. Sara screams in absolute terror. Hearing her scream, Carol rushes into the bathroom, but she cannot see anyone there. Carol assumes that the stress of pregnancy is affecting Sara mentally, but the fear on Sara's face makes it clear that what she saw felt completely real to her. As time passes, Sara's craving for raw meat grows even stronger. When she cannot find any meat at home, she secretly goes to a supermarket, buys raw meat, and starts eating it on the way back. On her way home, she runs into her ex-boyfriend Troy, who suddenly disappeared from her life about a year earlier without any explanation. Sara brings him back to her house, and that is when we learn a shocking truth. The baby growing inside Sara is actually Troy's child, but Troy does not seem to care much about it. Meeting new women and abandoning them afterward has always been his old habit. After Troy disappeared, Sara explains that her life completely fell apart. Everything changed for her. Then she met Carol, the woman who stood by her during the darkest and most difficult time of her life. As time passed, the two slowly fell in love with each other. But suddenly, Sara starts feeling pregnancy pains again. Troy notices her condition and becomes worried, asking if she is okay. Sara forces a smile and tells him that she is fine. While they are talking, Troy opens up about his family. He says that when he was very young, his grandparents died, and after that, his mother took responsibility for the family's old farmhouse and all the land. Now he is the one who looks after his mother and takes care of the entire farmhouse. A few moments later, Troy invites Sara to come to the farmhouse for dinner so that his mother can meet her. At first, Sara refuses because she could go into labor at any moment. But Troy keeps insisting that it will only be a short dinner visit and that they will not stay long. Then Troy places his hand on Sara's belly, feels the baby move, and confidently says that he is sure the baby is going to be a boy. Sara smiles, but deep down she starts feeling a little uneasy. Just then, Carol arrives. Sara introduces the two of them, but from the very first moment, Carol does not like Troy at all. When they are alone, she tells Sara clearly that she does not trust that man. She reminds her that this is the same person who abandoned her and disappeared from her life without any explanation. Sara, however, is thinking about something else. She knows that the delivery is going to be expensive, and she believes that Troy and his mother might be able to help them financially. Carol tries to make her understand that her pregnancy is in its final stage. At a time like this, she should avoid stress and should not be traveling anywhere. But Sara has already made up her mind. She wants to give Troy one last chance. She says that he is the father of her unborn child, and because of that, he deserves a chance to make up for his mistakes. Carol snaps back in anger, saying that just being a child's biological father doesn't make a careless man a real father. Even after hearing that, Sara refuses to change her mind, and she eventually leaves with Troy for his farmhouse. But before long, Sara realizes that the drive is taking far longer than she expected. Confused, she asks Troy, "I thought you said this place was right outside the city." Troy just smiles and brushes the question aside, telling her, "We're almost there." What feels even stranger is that he never gives her the exact address. So the moment they arrive at the farmhouse, Sara tries to send the address to Carol. But for some reason, the message refuses to go through properly. Troy then gives Sara a tour of the entire property, which sits in an extremely isolated area. As soon as they step inside, Troy's mother, Miss Loomis, warmly welcomes them. Sara accidentally calls her Mrs. Loomis, but the woman smiles and explains that she was never married. At first glance, everything seems completely normal. Miss Loomis tells Troy that dinner is almost ready and suggests that he show Sara around the farm in the meantime. Once they step outside, Sara notices dozens of child statues placed all around the house. Troy explains that his mother simply loves children. As he continues the tour, he tells her that the farm stretches across nearly 30 acres. His mother takes care of the house, while he handles the rest of the farm work. There is also a barn nearby. After a while, they head back inside for dinner. During the meal, Miss Loomis jokingly brings up embarrassing stories from Troy's childhood, trying to tease him. Troy quickly cuts her off, clearly uncomfortable discussing those things in front of Sara. Then in the middle of the conversation, Miss Loomis suddenly asks Sara, "Have you ever considered a home birth?" Sara says she has never thought about it because her girlfriend Carol doesn't like taking any unnecessary risks. The moment Carol's name comes up, Miss Loomis's expression changes completely. A few seconds later, she offers Sara a glass of milk. Proudly, she says that it is fresh, completely unpasteurized milk. But soon after drinking it, Sara suddenly begins to feel very sick. Trying to keep herself together, she excuses herself and rushes to the bathroom. There, she is hit with violent vomiting and intense dizziness. Panicked, she immediately calls Carol, but Carol is still angry, so she doesn't answer the phone. Trembling with fear, Sara leaves her a voice message and says, "Baby, something feels really wrong. I sent you the address. Please come quickly." But by then, Carol is already busy with work. Meanwhile, Sara's condition keeps getting worse. Somehow she manages to stagger back to the dining table. She thinks maybe she ate something bad. Miss Loomis tells her to try the dessert. Sara actually likes it a lot. But the moment she drinks the milk afterward, everything in front of her starts turning blurry. Suddenly, she loses her balance and collapses right onto the table. Troy quickly grabs her, but during the fall, Sara's face gets hurt and blood starts pouring from her nose. The shocking part is that Miss Loomis doesn't panic at all. At that moment, it becomes clear that this isn't an accident. It's part of a plan that was prepared in advance. She places her hand on Sara's stomach, feels it carefully, and then smiles in a very strange way, as if she has finally received the thing she has been waiting for years. On the other hand, Carol finally listens to Sara's voice message. Alarmed, she checks the location Sara sent and says in disbelief, "Why is this place so far away?" She calls Sara again and again, but there is no answer. Finally, Carol decides to drive to the farmhouse herself and bring Sara back. Meanwhile, Troy and his mother carry Sara inside the barn. When Sara wakes up, she finds herself tied up with ropes. Panicking, she asks Troy, "Where am I? What's happening to me?" But Troy tells her to stay calm. Then Troy's mother reveals a horrifying truth that completely shakes Sara to her core. She tells her that she was not chosen by a human. She was chosen by the devil himself. According to her, the child Sara is carrying is not an ordinary baby. It is the devil's son. Sara is terrified and starts thinking they are completely insane. That's when Miss Loomis begins telling the story of her family, a story that goes back many generations. She says her family has lived on this farm for centuries, and she herself was born in that very barn. Ever since she was a child, she used to hear strange voices. At first, she thought it was all in her imagination, but later she became convinced that the voices belonged to the devil. And those voices told her that her life had only one purpose: to bring the devil's son into the human world. As Troy grew older, he and his mother began preparing to fulfill the ancient prophecy. They would search for women, earn their trust, separate them from their normal lives, and bring them to this isolated farm. But every time they chose the wrong woman, and the ritual failed. Miss Loomis reveals that Sara is their sixth attempt, and this time they are completely convinced that she is the chosen woman through whom the prophecy will finally come true. At that very moment, Sara suddenly starts seeing the same horned man again. Terrified, Miss Loomis repeatedly asks her, "Is it him? Can you see the devil? Why can't I see him?" It becomes clear that Sara can see a supernatural force that no one else can. After that, the mother and son begin forcing Sara into labor. Sara keeps screaming for help. Meanwhile, Carol finally arrives at the farmhouse in a taxi, completely unaware of the horror unfolding inside. Seeing how nervous she is, the taxi driver asks if everything is okay. At first, Carol says yes, but then she asks him to wait outside for a few minutes. The moment she steps out of the taxi, she meets Troy. Acting perfectly normal, he welcomes her into the farmhouse and explains that the house was built in 1836 by his ancestor William Loomis, and that the first seance rituals in Canadian history were performed on this very land. When Carol asks about Sara, Troy lies and tells her that his mother has taken Sara to see the garden. But Carol slowly begins to realize that something is terribly wrong. Suddenly, Troy attacks her. A brutal struggle breaks out between them. Somehow, Carol manages to escape and runs back to the taxi. The frightened driver asks what happened. Shaking with fear, Carol says, "That crazy man tried to kill me. Get in the car now!" But before the driver can even understand what's happening, Troy reaches them and viciously stabs him with a knife. He then tries to capture Carol as well. She runs with all her strength, but Troy eventually catches her, ties up her hands and feet, and leaves her there for the wolves. Back inside, Troy and his mother force Sara to give birth. But this delivery is anything but normal. A horrifying transformation begins in Sara's body, and within moments the baby emerges from her mouth. The child is absolutely terrifying and looks nothing like a human baby. Miss Loomis picks it up in her arms and becomes hysterically happy, declaring that the prophecy has finally been fulfilled after all these years. Then she remembers that the baby must be fed raw meat. Troy says the meat was left back at the house. Miss Loomis continues holding the baby lovingly, believing it would never harm her. But in the very next moment, the demonic child suddenly tears into her neck and starts eating her flesh. Troy quickly pulls the baby away, but it is already too late. His mother dies. Enraged, Troy tries to kill the demonic child, but just then Carol returns and stabs Troy with a sharp weapon, killing him instead. She frees Sara. Relieved, Carol jokes, "Looks like now I can officially say I warned you." Sara gives a faint smile, though both of them know the danger is far from over. Then Sara suddenly asks in panic, "Where's the baby?" The two women begin searching for it, and after a while they finally find the child. At first they are horrified, but then Sara gathers her courage and picks the baby up in her arms. Despite its terrifying appearance, her maternal instinct makes her accept the child as her own. Carol supports her decision completely. After that, Sara and Carol leave the farm together, taking the baby with them. In the background, the song "Satan is Real" begins to play. The film makes one thing chillingly clear. The Loomis cult may be dead, but the devil's child has already been born into this world. The real danger has not ended. And with that, the movie comes to an end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching.